Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, whatever part of the world you are tuned in from. This is Funny Like a Clown podcast, episode 120, August 3rd, 2021. We do comedy here. As always, today's episode is brought to you by G Vegas Buffalo Sauce. For the spicy, sweet, savory taste of game time, there's only one G Vegas available at www.gvegas.webs.com. I don't know if he likes buffalo sauce, but I know he likes comedy. He's a writer-producer for the E! Channel. He's written several novels. He's a comedian turned author. Dan Barton, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And yes, I do like buffalo sauce.
Who don't like a good buffalo sauce? I'm hooked on buffalo mac and cheese lately, but
Oh God,
you can put it on anything. But
I know.
well, we're gonna get into you. I mean, you've had a legendary career in comedy, but let's start out with you turned author, and you got a series, Comedy Can Be Murder, and they can start out with your first book called Dummy, which when I saw the cover of this, it said Dummy, and then there was like a big circle with a microphone, which I tell a lot of kids, if you think you're gonna make money starting out in comedy, you're a dummy. But explain to us, what is the book Dummy about?
Well, Dummy is actually a novella about I've written a series of mysteries that feature a stand-up comedian turned amateur detective named Beth Kincaid. And actually, if you go to my website, danbartonbooks.com, and sign up for my newsletter, you can download a free copy of Dummy right now.
That's what I said. So you're not trying to trick nobody. You'll give them the first one for free, and they can decide if they like it or not, right?
Right. Yeah. Dummy is also available in audiobook format. Check your favorite audiobook distributor, including Audible, and also available from your possibly from your local library, so it won't cost you anything. And then the first full-length novel is called Killer Material, and I am wrapping up the audiobook version of the second one, Heckler. And it's basically based on a lot of experiences I had as a stand-up comedian. Stand-up comedy, as you know, is not always pretty. It's not always funny. It's tough. It's a tough way to make a living. And I felt that I wanted to show what happens when a comedian is not on stage. And I couched it in the framework of mysteries.
It's 10% fun and 90% business and politics is what I found. But
oh yeah, absolutely. So we all see the 10% that's fun, but I wanted to show kind of the dark side of comedy, and I kind of I exaggerate a little bit because it's about a comedian who lives in Los Angeles and lives in an apartment I used to live in right beneath the Hollywood sign of Beechwood Canyon.
Right.
And he kind of has a reputation as a problem solver, as somebody you can call when you don't get paid. In Dummy is about when he's going to go do a corporate gig in Santa Barbara, and he's the opening act. The headliner is a nationally known ventriloquist, and right before they go, someone steals the dummy and wants a ransom.
So this is like Jeff Dunham losing Ahmed and has to perform, right, and he ain't got Ahmed, right?
Right, yeah, at a big corporate gig.
Yeah.
So it goes into what corporate gigs are like, and then Biff springs into action and finds out who the dummy nappers are and brings them to justice.
All right, so this character, Beth Kincaid, as you said, this character is basically based on your experiences you had on the Sunset Strip when you were a comic, right?
Yeah, and I was on the road, and I spent about 2 years opening up for Sam Kinison, and I also I got to know a lot of comedians. I mean, a lot, and it was just realizing that it can be a hard scrabble life. You show up, and I mean, I know people that showed up for gigs and the club was closed. They didn't get paid.
We all got our war stories. Yeah.
Yeah, we've all got our war stories. And what I found out is that the best gigs make the worst stories. Like, oh, how'd the gig go? Oh, well, I got a standing ovation. The owner bonused me, and I went home with the prettiest waitress. That's not a story.
You crushed it that night, right? But the bad nights you remember more because they're more memorable, right? It's a story.
And they're the best stories. I'm sure you've heard plenty of them.
Oh yeah, I've experienced plenty and have plenty. But all right, so let's take it back to the beginning. I mean, when you first started in comedy, what made you want to be a comedian? What gave you the taste to want to try the business?
Oh God, childhood seeing comedians on TV, because comedians to me were the people that had all the answers. I always felt that comedians had a posture, which was like, you might be fooling everybody else, but you're not fooling me, whether it's politics, big business, uh, you know, social mores, stuff like that. And I was actually one of my early influences, one of the comedians that is a comedian that isn't talked about too much anymore. And his name was Alan King. And Alan King, yeah, because he would go on TV and he would go like, he basically he would go on these rants, against insurance companies, the phone company. This is before the phone company was broken up. And he would just kind of go on these angry rants, but he took the posture of like, you're not fooling me. And I always liked comedians that carried that forward. I always really liked George Carlin. I saw George Carlin live when I was 15 years old.
I saw him a month before he died up in Hampton Beach, Mass. Yeah.
Oh man, and he
was hunched over. He didn't move much, but he still brought it. Put on a heck of a show. He didn't move much on stage, but he was something. Yeah.
And what George Carlin did, and I met him. I met him at the American Comedy Awards when I was working for E, and I had a very George Carlin experience with him because there was the American Comedy Awards were in the Hilton Hotel, the Beverly Hilton Ballroom, and we were out in the hallway, and I said, well, God, and I mean, as like anybody, like you would be, like any comedian would be, I was just absolutely thrilled to meet him.
Right. Yeah.
And I said, well, how does it feel to be here? And he said, do you mean out here or in there? Because we're out here and the show is in there.
Right.
And I said, how's it feel to be at the American Comedy Awards? And he goes, again, that's in there.
Right.
And we're out here. And
when you turn on the stage persona, well, it's true. When the lights hit you, you kind of turn into a different person. Yeah, on stage, sure.
Well, it was just kind of, the thing about George Carlin was nothing got past him. The smallest thing didn't get
he was
past
too
him.
smart. You couldn't get nothing by George, sure.
And if you ever see his special Jammin' in New York, which he dedicates to Sam.
Yeah.
He has this whole thing about, what is pre-boarding? He has this whole thing about language, especially didn't get by him. He has this whole thing about getting on an airplane. Like, now it's time for pre-boarding. What's pre-boarding? To get on before you get on? It's like preheating an oven. The oven's either on or it's off. You don't preheat an oven. You either heat it or you don't. And you don't get on an airplane, do you? You get inside an airplane. I mean, just nothing. When he was at his best, he just was
call you out on stuff that's just everyday stuff, but you took for granted, but he'd call it out on it, right?
Yeah, but it's that whole, the thing, like I said, I thought comedians had the answers. They weren't like the guys that sang the love songs. When I actually began to date and have relationships, I went, these guys have kind of been slinging the BS, that love isn't really like this, and life isn't really like this. And like the movies were great, but they were, dreams, and TV was fun, but it was a show. But the comedians, it's kind of like in Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1, where he's a stand-up philosopher. And he calls himself a stand-up philosopher. He's in ancient Roman times. I'm a stand-up philosopher. And B. Arthur, he's at the unemployment office. Do you remember that scene? He's at the unemployment office and he goes, and she's the unemployment officer. And she goes, so what are you doing? He goes, I'm a stand-up philosopher. And she goes, oh, a bullshit artist. Okay, did you bullshit today? Do you plan on bullshitting next week?
Right.
And again, I always just thought that comedians were the ones that really knew what was going on.
So was he the guy that you wanted to try and style yourself after, that you admired him, that was the kind of comedy you wanted to do?
He was the first one that caught my eye as a truth teller. Right. But the person I listened to the most as a kid, who I bought all his albums and listened to over and over again, and is someone we have a very hard time talking about today, and that's Bill Cosby.
Right. Well, if you can separate the man from the work was genius. You can't argue that. The man, you could debate every which way but sideways, but the comedy was genius.
I didn't know that this was going on at the time, but I used to listen to his albums over and over again.
We all did, yeah.
Yeah, read the liner notes, listened to the uh, uh, and I would imagine, what's it like to be at this club? Where's this club? Where's this happening? I grew up in Lubbock, Texas, and I was like, where's this happening? Where are all this cool stuff happening? And another comedian that I really liked, I used to watch a show every week and listen to his albums, was Flip Wilson.
But close.
Yeah, and he actually did a bit about being a comedian called "You've Been On Too Long," and it was about it was about being a comedian and being on stage and being on too long, and like the crowd goes, the crowd gets mad at you. So
we get it after a while. We get it.
And then I watched a lot of game shows in the '70s and talk shows, and it just struck. I mean, honestly, nothing struck me as a more fun job. It just looked like the most fun job. Like they'd have Slappy White on Match Game, and he'd go like, well, I'm playing Caesar's Palace this week in Las Vegas. And I go like, oh man, that's this guy's job. I just thought it just seemed like so incredibly fun.
That's the old saying, if you get paid to do what you love, you never work a day in your life, right? So
yeah.
Do you remember what was your first time on stage? Where was it and how did you do? First time you tried it out?
It was in junior high. I was in a talent show and I pretended to be the local weatherman, and I did word for word George Carlin's "I'll Sleep the Hippy Dippy Weatherman."
And how was it received by your fellow students?
It went over very well. And I remember just hearing, that first time you hear, I was like this.
It's addictive, the rush you get, right? Yeah.
Oh man, I just was like, I actually stood up and, kind of took a bow while I was
you couldn't
stage.
wait to do it again, right? I can't wait to do it again.
Like, wow. And then and I remembered we had this week in high school called Twerp Week, where the girls got to ask out the boys. And the first year I didn't get asked out once. I did this high school talent show. Twerp Week was next week. I got asked out every single night of the week. And so I went, okay, laughs and girls. Okay.
I can give the girl, the babes. There you go. Laugh them right into the sack. Yeah, why not? Well, there's a few, if you're a comedian, okay, and, we explore the history of comedy here on Funny.com podcast. There's a few spots throughout the United States where, you could say was the legend of comedy. I'm a Boston guy. It goes back to the Ding Ho Chinese food restaurant here where Stephen Wrights, the Lenny Clarks, the Steve Sweeneys.
I've seen the documentary.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's the place for Boston. If you went out to Hollywood, you performed obviously the Comedy Store, but down in Texas, you were actually part of a very special time, and down there, the Comedy Workshop, where most people remember, the Sam Kinnisons, the Bill Hicks came from there, the Brett Butlers. But I mean, what was that time like being a comedian at that before everybody was popular? What was it like down there?
Well, it was, it was before there were comedy clubs in every city. I mean, it was like it was the. If you left Chicago and drove south, Houston was the first place you'd hit a comedy club. If you drove from coast to coast, you probably only find the only comedy club in Houston. And I did stand up in college at the Hole in the Wall, which was a legendary Austin place where Stevie Ray Vaughan used to play. And what it was like down there, it was very unself-conscious. You weren't looking at a bunch of other clubs and going, it was kind of isolated. There weren't any other comedy clubs in town. There were hardly any other comedy clubs in the country. They were basically focused on New York or LA as like a place to go.
So was it a professional place or more like an open mic, or how was it?
It was professional. It was professional. I mean, they had little jobs for you to do. I answered the phones. I worked the ticket booth. I think they paid something on the weekends.
Right.
But everyone was very professional minded. They had an open mic on Mondays, but it grew out of an open mic at the Comedy Workshop, which was a cabaret style, improv theater next door that put on shows, mainly skits and stuff like that. But they started to do a a stand-up comedy night on Mondays, and it got so popular that they expanded into a smaller venue next door, which was the Comics Annex.
Okay, so I mean, what was it? Sam Kinison and Bill Hicks, were they at the top of this, open mic group at the time, or who were the top
Well, they
guys
were.
there?
Well, I went there when the Comics Annex was already open. It had been open a couple of months.
Okay.
And Sam and Bill were still newcomers, and no one was really at the top. Everybody was all. There are a lot of really funny guys that you never heard of. I'm sure, like you've encountered in your career. I mean, but Sam was definitely evolving. He used to go on stage with a box full of props. He did some characters. He was in a coat and tie. He was 6 months out of the ministry. So but he quickly evolved. I mean, he quickly got to the point where he was
Starting to stand out a little bit.
Oh yeah, he knew how to get people's attention. I mean, where he was like, where he was developing the scream and also his point of view, where he would, because he'd been a preacher, he'd been a minister, and he knew you couldn't just get up there and go, "Oh, hi, how's everybody doing tonight?" He didn't approach it like that. He
was used to speaking in front of crowds, yeah,
and getting money out of them. So he
right.
would. He actually one night, and this got him in trouble with the management. He was always getting in trouble with the management. He went, "Who wants to donate so the comics can all go to breakfast at the House of Pies?" And he got a hat, and he went around the audience, and he raised money in a hat. And the management was like, "What are you doing? These people are
like that. Huh? Wow.
Okay, we have $25. Can we get 30? Anybody else got a $5? Stuff like that."
Like he's in church trying to get offerings, right?
Yeah, well, he was used to it. But Sam was, he stood out.
He was different styles in comedy, right?
He was different because he had that, he was older. He was like 26, 27, and he'd had that experience in the ministry where he'd been a preacher. So he was very comfortable on stage.
Right, that helps. What was Bill Hicks like? What was he like as a young comic before he was popular?
Kind of a straight-laced, kind of like he had a very different stage persona. I mean, like the later stage persona with like the duster and the hat and, smoking and the beard and the glasses. I'm like, that's not the guy I knew. That was
he invented that.
He created that. That was a stage persona. And, he actually, in that, he would do comedy that he was doing back then, just in that persona. He was more like this, like the kid that didn't, kind of an outsider kid. He was only like 18. I mean, he started to do comedy before he could legally be in the club. So he was, and they'd sneak him in and sneak. Yeah.
Couldn't relate to the older guys that were hanging out there, I would imagine. If you're 18, you're not relating to the other people if they're older than you, right?
Well, he was very advanced. He was very advanced in terms of comedy. I mean, he was like, he would get up there and he'd do these bits like, he would do bits about being in high school. And everybody's been in high school, right? I mean, so if he got up there and did bits about being in high school, people knew what he was talking about. It wasn't like he was going, when you're married and have kids, he wasn't talking about that. It was like being in high school. And he said, you have that thing where everyone's throwing a pencil and they're ducking and like going, look out. I get the pencil, I throw it, it goes right in some kid's eye and blinds him for life.
Oh boy.
And they go, God, Hicks, what are you, some kind of psycho? And, they do the thing where everyone's sitting down, someone pulls out a chair and they sit down anyway on the floor and they go, what a big laugh. I do it. The kid falls down, breaks his spine, and he's paralyzed from the waist down. Now he's in a wheelchair being pushed by the blind kid. Oh, look, there's Hicks. Oh, God, what are you, some kind of psycho?
So what was a lot of edgy material you guys were doing back then, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Sam would definitely push the envelope, and then also there were a lot of other very funny guys. There was Fred Greenlee, Carl LeBove, who unfortunately just passed away.
Friend of mine, Carl. Yeah, great guy.
Yeah, great guy. But Carl was also just the minute you saw him. I mean, he just.
Well, I had heard early on they said Carl was actually funnier than Sam early on. Then Sam hit the big time. But starting out, I heard Carl was actually a little bit funnier than Sam.
Well, not even just starting out at the Comedy Store. People said, and it's in that Comedy Store documentary on Showtime, where people said they thought Carl was going to make it. They thought Carl was going to be the one to make it
He
big,
was
not
gonna make it
Sam.
instead of Sam, right? Yeah.
Because
So I
Carl was
mean, I said the world lost a great comedian. They lost an even better man. You know, Carl was such a great guy. But do you
yeah.
have any pay tribute, any great story of Carl LeBove? Or?
Well, since we're talking about Houston, he used to do this bit where he would end his act by leaving for LA and going to Hollywood to make it big. So he would like do his act. People would be laughing and applauding. He goes, "You people love me," and they go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Do you think I'm going to make it?" He goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "You know what? Do you think I should go to Hollywood?" And the crowd would go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Okay, I'm going to leave right now." And he'd get off stage, be going through the crowd, shaking hands, going, "Thanks, man. Thanks. You believe in me. Great, man. Great." And we had a plate glass window out in front of the annex, and he goes, "Stand out in front and, hitch a ride to Hollywood." And like, he would get them, like people pull over, pick him up, and you have to go
over the top.
I don't really need a ride. This is just a gag, and it's that's how he would end the show, and people would go, "Oh well, okay, that was Carl LeBove, and I guess he's off to Hollywood." I mean, they didn't know it was a joke until they did it again. But that's
the different stuff that sells right there. But I guess one of the famous stories, I don't know if you were there for it or not, was when Sam broke the stool and he got in trouble for breaking the stool and crucified himself. What do you remember about that happening?
Well, I remember what happened was he sat on the stool and it creaked, and Sam was, not a small guy, and he goes,
big dude, right?
Yeah, and he goes, like, what is this? And he flips the stool over to look at it, and he goes, what kind of cheap stool
shit
is
they got in
this?
this
And
place.
And it had a price, and Steve Epstein, Epi, we called him, flipped over. They said, turn it over. And he turns over, and it's like the price of the stool is like $12. And Sam goes, "What? $12? But this stool, everyone uses a stool. We should have a better stool than this." So what he did was he took out a 20 and he laid it on the table, and then he laid the 20 on the table, and then he picked up the stool and just smashed it.
Well, that was the rule, he said, because Sam was such a drawer, I guess. What was it? That you could break the stool, but you had to pay for it. So Sam said, "I'll pay for it. I'm breaking it."
He paid for it, and he put down a 20 for a $12 stool, right? And then smashed it up on stage, and then he got banned for it.
Well, they said that was like him inciting a riot, like, the other people wanted to smash stuff too because he was doing it. Was that what happened, or do you remember?
No. We had a guy who had been brought in, who was big on the college circuit, or he was on the college circuit. I don't know how big he was, and he had, I mean, like in any club, it's not an unreasonable rule. Don't break anything.
Don't break stuff, yeah, right.
So they banned him like for a week, and then he so what he did was I went with him, and we went and got like some towels and ketchup and a broomstick, and they had I think it was called a Handy Hut right across the street. Stop and Go in Houston. It was a little convenience store in Houston called a Stop and Go, and Sam crucified himself across the street in full view of the plate glass window. He like put a crown of thorns on his head. He had ketchup all over him, and he had like a towel around his waist.
I can imagine a comedy show going on and just a comic up there. Yeah. And all of a sudden, everybody's looking out the window. He's like, "What's going on?"
That's exactly what happened. And I remember somebody called the cops on him, and the cops pulled up, and they thought it was funny.
Oh, well, good
And
for
they
him, I guess.
said, yeah. And then one of them said, rolled down the window and said, "Hey, Easter was 2 weeks ago." And Sam goes, "Yeah, but you know these TWA flights." And he's out there just hanging on this homemade cross, and it's
So how did
it's
that
a
eventually get him back in the club? I mean, did that just they let him back in after he did that, or
well, the suspension was kind of, suspension ran out. He was suspended for like 2 weeks or whatever, and then
well, so he still had even after doing that, he had to live out the suspension, yeah.
yeah, to live out the suspension. But like when he came back, he like rented a limo and wore a tux, and then
Turned into a big thing.
they'd replace the stool, and he picked up that stool and he smashed that one again.
He didn't learn his lesson, I guess, right? He's making a
Well,
statement.
he didn't. He was not, and they come up with all these rules.
He didn't care, right?
He would draw lines. He read down the list of rules and he just draw lines through them. He just didn't care about any of them.
He was an outlaw. Well, you guys, I mean, what? So Steve Epstein, I guess, came up with the name the Texas Outlaw Comics. Then when you guys decided to move to Hollywood, Sam started the name the Outlaws of Comedy, which I guess caused kind of a rift because Steve thought he was owed money because he was using the name. But, well, what was that rift about?
Steve was owed money because he. I just realized when I gesticulate and tell my stories, you probably can't see me too well, so I'm going to change positions here. Steve was owed money from a show that they did at the Tower Theater in Houston. Sam borrowed money from Steve Epstein to do this show.
Okay.
And so he was owed actual money that Sam borrowed from him.
Okay, I heard the show didn't go too well, right?
It didn't go too well. No, it was like 1,000 seat. It was like a couple of 1,000-seat theater, and no, not that many people showed up.
But as far as the naming rights, did Steve feel he had to patent that name, right? He patented the name the Texas Outlaws because he felt Sam was kind of using that name, the Outlaw Comics. Was this what he was doing?
I don't know that much about that. I never heard that much about that. I know that you have to. From what I know, just from my work as an author, it's trademarking is the way to go.
Right.
But I never heard that there was. I heard that there really wasn't a dispute over the name as much as the factions. Like there were the Outlaw Comics in Houston, which was kind of Bill Hicks and Epi and some other guys. And then there was Sam and his Outlaws of Comedy, which he called his opening acts. And
right.
He wanted to, I think Sam wanted to like tour them or something, but he never got that off the ground.
So you were part of that group that originally decided to move from Texas to LA. Yeah. And I mean, nowadays with the internet, I mean, you can make a name for yourself anywhere. I mean, you had to go to New York or LA if you really want to make it big, but you had to, sleep in your car, sell your furniture. What was that like were you young and that was an easy decision, or was that a tough decision for you to move?
No, it was a tough decision because like you said, now with the internet, I think the world seems a lot smaller to people, right. LA was like this monolith. And remember, I'd grown up in, my dad was a college professor, so I'd moved around the country. I lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, Lawrence, Kansas, and Lubbock, Texas. I'd lived in these medium-sized college cities.
That had to be a scary place for you.
Yeah, LA was just like this behemoth. I mean, like if you've ever driven out to LA, LA basically starts about an hour outside of LA. I mean, you're driving through Solid City for an hour and then you get to LA. And I was so naive that I didn't even have a map. I just drove. I just followed the freeway signs that said Los Angeles. I saw the 101 sign that said Hollywood. I took that.
So is that what made you finally choose to go? Was just the dream of being a star? Is that what made you, I'm going to do this? Or?
I also had the writing, and it was just kind of like, it was the idea of having a job I didn't really hate. It was the idea of, it was the California dream. I mean, although I'd grown up elsewhere, I was born in California. My parents met and married in California. Okay. So I grew up in a household where California was always talked about. I mean, and LA I'd gone to film school at the University of Texas, hook 'em horns. And it was just kind of the Mecca. It was like, if you want to do something creative, I mean, I could stay in, what was I going to do if I stayed in Texas?
If you wanted your dream, that was where you had to go, right?
Well, it's where it lived. I
Right.
mean, it was like it was like the cloud, it was like,
What was the reception like when you finally got there? Was it everything you thought it'd be, or a lot tougher, or?
uh, good at first and then tougher, but I think I made it tough on myself. I mean, it's like some people get here and start working right away. I mean,
Right
they were a
spot, right
lot
time.
yeah, well, they're a lot more prepared and professional than I was. I had a ways to go before I realized that you think of show business as, when you don't grow up in it, or you're not near it, or you're not exposed to it, you think of show business as either a wild party time, or you think about it like
It's all fun, no business, right?
all fun, no business. You can show up whenever you want. You can do whatever you want. No, it's like, a 7 a.m. call and know your lines and hit your marks. And, took me a long time to grasp the professional aspects of the entertainment business.
Okay, so I mean, when you first got out there, did you have enough money to survive? Because I hear the stories of comics sleeping in their cars, and I mean, did you have enough money to get by for a while, or were you just
No,
living the
no,
rough life then?
no. I rolled into town with $100,
Oh, geez, that
and
didn't take it very far, did it?
no, and so I had to stay with friends. Some friends I hadn't seen since high school or college. I did some couch surfing. I got a day job in an office, and I had the worst apartment that was over a bus stop and leaked from end to end. And this is back when it used to rain in LA.
Yeah.
And so it took some time. It took about 2 years for me to finally
But
get
that's
out
what
of
you got to
just
do to make it. Some people tuck tail and go back home. They can't handle that. But if you stick it
oh
out, those are the guys who
a
eventually
lot,
make it.
a lot of people do that. A
Did
lot
you
of
ever
people do that.
consider going back home, or were you going to stick it
I
out no
did.
matter what? Did you? Yeah.
I
That's good.
considered going back home. I actually got a catalog from the Texas Tech University Law School. And I was thinking of going to law school, being a lawyer, and making a living that way. And
You could make the money then, but you wouldn't have had as much fun, right?
oh, I hear that it's just, yeah. And I don't even know that you make the money. I mean,
Right.
anymore. I mean, it's just, but
You
thank
owe a lot for the
goodness.
schooling, so you make the money, but you got a lot of student loans you got to pay back. So
Well, yeah, and it's just not, it just wasn't for me. I wouldn't have stuck with it. I was meant to join the circus.
all right, so something must have went right for you. You started performing at the Comedy Store, the Improv, the Laugh Factory, the Ice House. So I mean, these are the top venues out in LA. So, well, what happened for you when things started rolling for you?
Well, I actually started to get a lot of work as a writer. And so I concentrated on that. I sold some books. I worked actually as an entertainment journalist a lot, and did a lot of interviewing and writing and movie reviewing and stuff like that. So my career in comedy was kind of off and on until Sam made it big, and then he took me out on the road with him.
He
And
remembered all of his friends, right? When he made it big, he didn't forget who he
he
came up with.
did.
Right?
He
What was
did.
it like touring with Sam? I mean, was that
Oh, well, I
constant
kind of
party?
oh yeah, well, yeah. I kind of got on the second tier of his touring schedule. The first tier was when he was playing 6,000 to 8,000 seat theaters,
Wow.
and his first flush of fame and success. And I got in on the second tier, which were the 2,500 to 3,000 seat theaters, and the opening act were usually some combination of me, Jimmy Schubert, and Carl.
Okay. How are the crowds? Because I mean, I've interviewed Bill, and he said most of the openings, you tell, look, the crowd's going to shit on you. They want Sam. Just do your time, get through it. I mean, what was it like? Did you have your good nights and bad nights, or were the crowds accepting of you guys, or
Mainly good nights. Mainly
more
good
good than bad?
nights.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's
Yeah,
good.
it was quite a leap for me, because at the time I was going up at the Laugh Factory, the old Laugh Factory, which was like just a closet basically on Sunset, right next to a Chinese restaurant called Ah Fong's, where the Laugh Factory is now, is basically the old Laugh Factory plus Ah Fong's. And Ah Fong's was owned by Benson Fong, who played the blind Master Po on the TV series Kung Fu. So that was Ah Fong's.
There's a
And
trivia.
yeah, a little trivia for you. But you run into that stuff everywhere in LA. But I was going up at the old Laugh Factory where I would be performing to 2 people.
Right.
And halfway through my act, they'd get up and leave.
So it's not the Mecca. Well, back then, it's not the Mecca it was today.
No,
I had Chance Langdon on. He said he was driving by the Comedy Store, and he said they called it potluck. He just went in and signed up, and you got to perform at the Comedy Store. Good luck doing that now. You know, I can have no.
Oh yeah, good luck doing that now. But I literally went from performing in front of like 2 people at the old Laugh Factory on Sunset, and 48 hours later, I was opening up for Sam for a sold out theater of 3,000.
Wow. So you were
And
beyond
Sam
nervous,
gave me-
to say the least, right?
Yeah, a little bit. I was so
You got
nervous.
used to it after a while. I mean, once you did it enough, like anything, you must have got used to it and found your niche, right?
Yeah, but Sam gave me some great advice.
Okay.
He pointed to the audience through the curtain, because you could hear the audience through the curtain. And you could hear this theater full of people like,
Yeah.
And I said, God, I've never done this before. What am I supposed to do? And first of all, he said, well, do your act. Okay. And he said, he pointed to the audience on the other side of the curtain, and he said, they don't know you don't do this every night. They don't know you haven't been doing this for the last 6 weeks. They don't know anything you don't tell them.
Right.
And whenever I got in a jam, like I remember when with Carl, where I said, I haven't done my act in a month, and Carl would say, well, don't tell them that. He pointed at the audience. Don't let them know.
Yeah, it's show business. Just go with the show, right?
And I was so nervous, I asked Sam if I could not do the show.
Really?
Yeah. And if I could do it tomorrow night. And
What
he
did he
said,
say?
no, you're doing the show tonight.
Going on, buddy.
You're going on. He said, I paid for your plane ticket. I'm paying for your hotel room. I'm paying for your meals. You're going on. I know you can. And then he said, I know you. I know you can do it. And I did it.
Did it work out? Yeah.
I did it. Yeah. It was not a bad show at all. It was a good show. Real big rush to perform for 3,000 people.
So what was it like? I mean, everybody, you see Hollywood from a fan's point of view. It's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, especially with Sam. He epitomated that in the 80s. But what was like the after shows like? What were the after parties like? I know you got to go to the Playboy Mansion, which, I mean, few people get to do. I mean, is it everything that, the fan would think it would be, or is it more they play it up, or how were the parties with Sam?
Well, I got to go to the Playboy Mansion working for E. I was a supervising producer of a show they had on E called Wild On with Brooke Burke.
Right.
And going to the Playboy Mansion is kind of like being invited on board the Starship Enterprise, because it's like you go, wait, it's real?
But a few people get to go. That's why.
I always heard about this place. I didn't know it was real.
It exists now, right?
Everybody's here, including Captain Kirk, and it was like, it's if I were to describe the Playboy Mansion with one attribute, I would say that, well, it sounds ridiculous, but it's a great place to meet women.
Was Hef there? Did you get to meet Hef or no?
I got to meet Hef. I got to meet Hef. I got to interview Hef, and that was the 2 things that you would absolutely get a yes on for a date was to the Playboy Mansion and to an awards show. Like you go, I'm going to the Playboy Mansion this weekend. Did you want to? Yes, I know exactly what I want to wear.
Yeah.
And it was like,
So was it all sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or was it more laid back?
With Sam, it was sometimes it was sex, drugs, rock and roll, but sometimes it was that. But other times it was get to the bus as fast as you get to the tour bus as fast as you can.
Yeah.
And we're going to watch old black and white horror movies from the Universal days.
Really?
We're going to watch Bride of Frankenstein.
Okay.
Sam loved movies. He had an incredible appetite for movies. It was a lot of times it was get on the bus as quick as you can, get out of town.
So there were some
So-
regular nights and there were some wild nights, right?
There were some nights where Sam would disappear. We'd be in some town out in the middle of nowhere that we'd never been to before, and we couldn't find Sam. Where is he? You know, and one time he got into this kind of nitrous oxide phase, and they found him strapped to a dentist chair with a nitrous oxide mask over his face, like.
And talking about that on one of his albums. This is what you guys pay me to do. I'm trying this stuff out, you know. It's like,
yeah, no, he was not. It was not a persona. He definitely was. I mean, there were some long nights.
I flew up to Alaska and I opened up for Carl LeBove up there. When you're hanging out with Carl, it was like free food, free drinks. Come to the front of the line. You get before everybody. It was just like. The week got over and I was like, oh, I got to go back to work. I can't have to live in this kind of lifestyle. But was it like that with Sam? Just the Hollywood glitz?
It was. There were a lot of celebrities because everybody knew Sam. He was still in the kind of the early, not the early, he was kind of in the middle stages of his fame. And so it was meeting celebrities all the time, getting to go backstage at Letterman, backstage at the Tonight Show, awards
Everything
shows.
you dream of as a young comic, you were actually living.
Yeah,
right?
Saturday Night Live. I got to go backstage at Saturday Night Live, and he would just invite you to everything. He was very inclusive. Like there was a actually very talented director and performer named Alan Metter. He directed Sam in Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield.
Right.
And we were backstage. Yeah, we were backstage at Saturday Night Live, and Alan Metter said to me, he goes, you know, Sam's not like other comedians. And I said, what do you mean? He said, he's kept all his old friends. And I said, well, what do the other comedians do? And they go, they get rid of their old friends, get new friends.
Everybody, yeah, right.
And so he wasn't like that. He kept the old friends around for the ride, you know. So
That's good to hear. Yeah, you don't forget where you come from. I know I never dug people in business to forget where they came from. But so tragically, the world lost another great comedian. Sam passed away, and then you started headlining on your own, pretty much across the country and some other countries. What was that like for you, being a main act now as opposed to an opening act?
Well, it was good. It was where a lot of the Beth Kincaid novels come from, is the headlining experience on my own. That's where I really started to gather string for that. And it was actually, I got the idea. I'd written and published a couple of novels before then, but I was actually overseas in London when the owner, I was playing a basement bar, what's called a wine bar in London. And it was, the hotel was threatening to shut down the comedy show. I wasn't getting paid, and we still had to go on and do a show. And I was like, God, if this is such tension, somebody's going to get killed. And that's where I went, well, why don't you write a murder mystery about stand-up comedy? But it, touring.
That's where the idea came from.
That's where the idea came from. It was from a gig. I still have the notebook where I wrote down, make him a comedian detective. And then I wrote Beth Kincaid, because Beth Kincaid was a fake name for a fake comedian we came up with in Houston that we used to blame stuff on. And,
really? You remembered the name from that, right?
Yeah. We used to put them on lineups, and we go, coming up next. Okay, next week, we're going to have, and we list all the real comics: Steve Epstein, Ron Robertson, Charles Montgomery, Beth Kincaid, Carl LeBeau, Sam Gibbs. And one time I was answering phones at the Comedy Workshop, and somebody called up to complain because they'd been at the stand-up comedy show the night before. And they said, you know, you had some comic on there that was just the worst stand-up comedian I've ever seen. I go, oh, well, can you describe him for me? So he starts to describe him. And I realize he's talking about me. And I don't want to say, when he says, you should never have that guy back. And I go, I know the comedian you're talking about. His name is Beth Kincaid.
Blame it on Beth still, right?
Yeah. So, but touring on your own is where you really get to see what you're made of as a comedian.
How long did you do it for? How long did you tour as a headliner for?
A couple of years. A couple of years. And And I don't recommend it for the health of long-term domestic relationships.
Right.
Um,
Well, I've heard from a lot of comics, like when you first start doing it, you're saying, this is everything I dreamed of. This is the dream. I'm a headlining comic. I'm traveling. Then after a while, the burn of the road hits, and you're like, if I died out here, would anybody even know? It's like, it
oh
kind of
yeah,
hits you. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
so the burn of the road got to you, definitely.
Well, you kind of feel like this human jukebox, like you're just going from town to town and they're plugging you in, because when you go to these clubs, everybody in the club, they work with each other every week. They all
Right.
know each other. They're all friends. You're the
The new
stranger.
guy, right.
So but it was fun while it lasted. I remember the one nighter scene in like San Diego and LA and Orange County. It was there was a brief period of time where I could stay in LA and kind of scrape together a living as a stand-up comic, just playing San Diego and Santa Barbara and all the different gigs around town. You could kind of piece it together. But going out on the road to Florida for weeks at a time was not.
It'll wear on you after a while, I imagine.
Well,
Yeah.
it didn't win any points for me with my girlfriend. You're gone for 3 weeks, and
Yeah,
it's
tough to maintain a relationship like that, I'm sure. Yeah. Huh.
oh yeah, oh yeah. So eventually, I came back and
So you came
my
back, and
job.
as you mentioned, I mean, you got a job for the E channel. How did that come
Uh,
about? The entertainment channel. How did you land that?
well, it happened rather quickly. I started freelancing in local TV stations, just writing news. I was doing temp jobs and um, doing day jobs here and there, just to stay in town, so my girlfriend wouldn't break up with me. And
Good a reason as any? Sure.
good a reason as any, yeah. And then and some of the temp jobs would go on a little long, and they would go, we want to hire you full time, and we'll pay you this money, these benefits. Ended up at a day job that was really not very fulfilling, very stressful. And I got to do something else. So I started freelance writing for some local TV stations, and writing news. And then I overheard somebody talking about E, and I said, well, do they hire freelancers at E? And they said, yeah. And the thing about E was, like, if you're writing for the local newscast, you either have to write for the overnights, which is you start at like 10 at night and you get off at like 8 in the morning because you're writing for the early morning news, or you go in at 3 in the afternoon and you get off at 10 at night, 11 at night. And the thing about E was more 9 to 5, and you were doing entertainment news, all that. And so I called him up, used this person as a reference, took their writing test, passed, and got hired, and just was determined to make something of myself there. And because I've been knocking around on the road for so long with a lot of financial insecurity, and I went, you know what, I'm just
This is your
gonna.
one big chance to be stable, right?
Yeah, and it worked. It worked, and it was.
Like you
It
said, it had to
was.
work. You were what, supervising producer of Wild On? So I mean, they
I had a
must have
couple of
thought something
shows.
of you
Yeah.
to give that, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always say that my first week at E, uh, the Friday of my first week at E, they sent me to interview Elizabeth Hurley at the Four Seasons in Beverly Hills. And and when she walked in the room and said, hello, Dan Barton with the Entertainment Television, I went, I think I'm kind of done with the road for a while, because like the Four Seasons in Beverly Hills, it was like, can we get you in? It wasn't like being on the road as a comic where like, oh, we're out of toilet paper at the condo. You bring any?
Yeah.
No, and like, you got a cheeseburger and fries and one beer. Okay, don't go on stage drunk. And this was like, would you like to go to the Ritz-Carlton in the Marina Del Rey and interview the cast of Baywatch? Yeah, I think
Upper
I
class
can.
stuff you're doing now, right?
Yeah, and I was covering movie premieres, and I mean, it was all expenses paid, and I mean, if you're it was,
That's what you worked for, and you finally got it. So you deserved it. You worked that hard, sleeping in your car to staying in big time hotels. But I mean, it's the podcast is perfect for me. I'm blue collar. I couldn't do anything much intelligence. That's why I'm an everyday guy. But it said you had over 1,000 celebrity interviews. You've done over 1,000. So what would
yeah.
be your advice? What's the advice to being a good interviewer? What do you think it is?
My advice to being a good interviewer, and you are a very good one, I have to say.
Thank you very much.
You're very good. You're very
I'm
good.
hitting numbers with this podcast. I never dreamed when I started it. So I said, I must be doing something
Yeah.
right.
But you're very good. And the thing is the advice I would give is something I think you already understand, which is it's not about your questions, it's about their answers.
Right.
And you have a way of concisely phrasing a question to get a good answer. And you're not competing. The thing I learned is when people start answering, just shut up and get the answer. Get
Right.
the answer.
Good advice.
But no, you're very good at this. You could
Maybe I'll work for you someday. Who knows? But so I want to take it back. I mean, I ask every comic this because we're hitting kind of a gray area in comedy. Now, when you guys started out as the Texas Outlaws, you were starting out as a group of comics that were going to speak your mind. You weren't going to sell out to the industry. You're going to tell it the way it was, whatever. Which, if you work clean in comedy, we all know you work all the time. If you work dirty, you have a lot of fun, but it's not always the big payday. Now, back in the 80s and the partying days, we could get away with that because nobody was offended by anything. Nowadays, it seems you can't tell any joke and somebody's offended by something. So have you had to change that stance over the years, where you've had to change your act to appeal to the new audiences that are offended by everything? Or are you still going to stick to, you say whatever you want, whatever happens, happens?
I would bear in mind the current climate. I would realize that the climate is the climate. The landscape is the landscape. And I would see if you could work around it somehow. I mean, bearing in mind that the marketplace doesn't necessarily support. I have been on the wrong side of political incorrectness, and the price to pay is sometimes too high. And I wish comedy was a free zone where you could say and do whatever you wanted.
It used to be.
It used to be. And we've been talking about people that used it for that.
Right.
For just it. Like if it used to be that if you told somebody was like Dice, if you told him something was offensive, he would come back and do something else. But Dice couldn't get people to see that he was portraying a character. I mean,
Right. It was an act. It wasn't the real him.
It was an act. It wasn't him. And kind of like Larry the Cable Guy is a character. He's an act. And a lot of people don't get that. But I would say that if you want to advance yourself commercially, you have to bear in mind what people are looking for. I think that
they want, not what you want to do, right?
Well, I would say do what you want to do, but really have a good reason for. I think you have to think twice before you cross the line, so to speak. Like, why are you really doing that? What's how can you justify that? How is that really made? How can that really be a part of what you're doing?
What's the payoff? Is it going to help me or is it going to hurt me? I guess that's what you got to think of. But it's a different time we live in. I mean, it's tough time to be a comedian nowadays, no matter what you do, as compared to the years ago when you could do anything.
Well, a lot of times when you were doing whatever you were going to do, you're in some club in Oklahoma and nobody had a phone to record your act.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Now it's like,
All right. So, we've talked about how you got started. We talked about what you've done. You've had a legendary career. I mean, what's in your future? I mean, is there anything you'd like to accomplish before it's done? Anything before it's all said and done you want to say, I want to accomplish that? Uh-oh. We seem to have lost Dan. He's back. There he is.
No, I'm back. I'm sorry. I just had a phone call there. I had a phone call that came through. Apparently, all my devices, my iPhone and everything, is
all
linked.
connected. Yeah, I had that happen to me earlier. I was talking to my girlfriend, and somebody called, and I got cut off from her. I'm like, I didn't hang up on you. I swear. I didn't.
Yeah. What's coming up next for me is I'm coming out with more books and audiobooks. I found that audiobooks are actually a very expressive way. I mean, it's like performing. I mean, I set up a little home studio, and I can write a story, I can narrate it, I can put it out there, and let the chips fall where they may. So what's coming up next is the audiobook release of Heckler, the next Beth Kincaid mystery. And there's going to be many more coming down the pike. So again, if you want to check all that out, it's danbartonbooks.com. And that's when I'm, with the pandemic and everything, I had to focus on home-based economics, so to speak, and a home-based business. And that's what's up. That's what's up next for me. And
seems to be satisfying. I mean, you seem to have fun doing it, right?
I do. And then, maybe eventually getting all these memories that I've been sharing with you down in either a podcast format or an audiobook format or a memoir format. I mean, we seem to have my whole generation of comedians is coming up with like, well, when I did the road, I mean, it was a whole lot of comedy.
It was a different time, but I mean, the young comics, they should want to hear about that because it's so different than what the road is today as compared to, back when these legendary places were just opening. Yeah.
Well, what we've got now is people who've got all these Twitter followers or Instagram followers, but they get up on stage. I mean, I've always judged people by what's their live act like.
Right.
They get up on stage, they can't hold a live crowd. I hope that doesn't get lost. And now with the pandemic, we haven't had live crowds in a while. I hope that returns.
Yeah, it's just starting back here messages. We're starting to get back to normal now, but it's been a long road. But how long that's going to last, we don't know. It's been up and down. But again, I'd say about your audiobooks, you're being more than fair. You're giving the first one for free, so you can listen to the first one and decide whether they like you or not, and whether you want to go to the second one's up to them. So I think that's a great thing you got going on. Well, thanks, dude. I'll get my last question here. I always ask this question. Are there any young comics that you admire that, I mean, the many years you've been on the circuit, that do you think we should keep an eye out for? Who are the young guys you admire?
I'm not too in touch with the young comedy scene too much, but I would all the guys I pay attention to are kind of my peer group that have been growing up. But I'd be more open to recommendations if I could. But I would say that
Bill Burr, he's a Boston guy. I get a kick out of Bill Burr. I like him.
Oh, I like Bill Burr a lot too. I like Brian Regan a lot.
Brian Regan, okay, yeah.
And then also, if I can give a shout out to my good friend Jimmy Schubert, he's somebody that is always coming up with great new stuff.
I mean, I opened for Jimmy here in Massachusetts at the Lots of Laughs Comedy Lounge. Great guy. I love Jimmy. Got a lot of good stories like you, Jimmy. So I hope they get him on the podcast soon. But
yeah, but Bill Burr is definitely one of the better comedians out there today.
Good stuff. All right, Dan, I want to thank you for being on. I wish you luck with your audiobooks and in the future with your entire career.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me on. Again, I enjoyed it. I appreciate it.
Great stories. We'll see you soon. Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.